Great. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome all. My name is Claire O'Donnell, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's event, Keeping Budget Promises. How can we ensure that country spending towards the SDGs is on track? This event, again, is being conducted in English, Spanish, and French, so please press the interpretation or language button on your screen to select the language in which you would like to listen to today's discussion. And as we begin, we welcome you to continue introducing yourselves. Great to hear that we have representation and people zooming in from all over. So as we get started, as we reach the halfway mark to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and prepare for the Global SDG Summit, the world is not where it needs to be to achieve the agreed upon targets. Government budgets serve as a roadmap, guiding spending towards effective delivery of public services and progress on sustainable development. While trillions of dollars are being mobilized to reach development goals, our research finds that national budgets are not being effectively and efficiently spent. Budget credibility is defined as the ability of governments to meet the fiscal targets set out in their annual budgets and can be a useful measure for government's ability to uphold their promises during budget execution. While underspending is mainly reported at aggregate levels, our research finds that underspending tends to be concentrated in specific sectors, disproportionately impacting social sectors. Therefore, working with civil society partners, we wanted to dig deeper to understand expenditure deviations in key sectors related to global goals. From this research, we are excited to be launching a series of 13 case studies, a global synthesis, and a how-to guide to assess budget credibility challenges in sectors. And today, we are really excited to be hearing from case study authors themselves. After a few short interventions in plenary, we'll be having breakout group discussions by sectors of focus, including health, education, agriculture, and water and sanitation, where we will have a chance to continue to hear directly from these civil society partners and engage in how this work and research might be relevant to you. We hope that this can be an engaging session and looking forward to hearing from you. So please feel free to add your questions and relevant experiences in the chat throughout today's session. Our first speaker today is from the PIFA, or Public Expenditure Financial Accountability Secretariat, Srinivas Gurizada. Many of you may already be familiar with PIFA, which is a framework for assessing and reporting on the strengths and weaknesses of public financial management systems. The PIFA framework includes an assessment of budget credibility as part of this assessment, which is also known in PIFA as budget reliability. The PIFA Secretariat is also the main institution responsible for reporting on a critical SDG indicator, SDG 16.6.1, which is a measure of budget credibility at the aggregate level that recognizes the importance of this issue as a cross-cutting topic that supports the achievement of all other SDG goals and targets. So to start off our webinar today, we are honored to open with a few words from Srinivas Gurizada. Over to you. Thank you, Srini.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning from Washington, D.C. It's indeed such a great pleasure joining this very important event on keeping budget promises. Probably keeping promises is the biggest challenge, and that too, budget promises, because budget is a state always for a government, it's a statement of intent. Now, sometimes there is always this little bit of an optimism bias in budget preparation. Still, how do we make it work? And how do you keep budget promises? From the PIFA Secretariat, so from the PIFA work that we do, we see budget credibility. How do you get budgets work for governments? Two pieces into it. One piece of it is essentially the technical issues around budget preparation. The other is the non-technical, the political economy issues, the local context issues. And I'm so delighted to see this work with IBP, which actually comes to unpack the real issues which cannot be easily found through very mechanical and technical analysis of stuff at ground level. And that's the great job I think actually IBP is doing and actually working on this agenda. Let me make a couple of quick thoughts building on this principle that there are two aspects to make budgets work. So the technical and the non-technical. Let me talk a little bit about the technical aspects. From our perspective, so as Claire mentioned, PIFA is known as a gold standard PFM framework. So it is the understanding is that poor or weak public financial management systems, they affect the ability of meeting the budget promises, and which leads to weaker ability to meet the sustainable development goals. Typically, if across the SDGs, weak PFM systems would hamper, and a strong PFM systems probably would enable better allocation decisions, better funding of policies, stable policies, and public services are delivery, the contribution to public services is higher. So all three aspects, we see budget cycle having three goals, three budgetary outcomes: aggregate fiscal discipline, allocative efficiency, and service delivery. And amongst them, the discipline affects the other two also. So it is this cumulative effect we see as public financial management systems as one aspect which leads to strengthened ability to keep budget promises. uh, many cases one would see probably that budget credibility would mean how well you spend budget, but that how well you spend budget, behind it, in the PIFA literature. So if you www.pifa.org, you will get a lot of the information around. You have 31 indicators or aspects and 94 dimensions. Each of them are interrelated and they affect the overall budget credibility is the hypothesis based on which we work around. Now, if you take globally how public financial management systems are as of today, so the aggregate score of PFM systems, if you add up the 150 plus countries which use PIFA for PFM reforms, in aggregate is C in a grading of A to D, A being the highest and the D being lowest, which means there is huge scope for improvement. So that's one point actually I would like to specifically bring up in this conversation, that weaker public financial management systems are already affecting the ability to deliver on the budget processes. We see that in the SDG 16.6.1, Claire mentioned, which is so the PIFA is the primary data provider for United Nations to monitor this particular SDG. In a way, this is one particular SDG, but it has cross-cutting impact over every other SDG, because eventually we are talking of the use of the credible budgets as such, how we are using. Now, let me make one quick point since there is discussion. I'm looking forward to the discussion later around sectors and ministries. So let me pitch one thought. What do you think? Let's say, for example, a government suddenly has a windfall additional revenue, lot of new money. How much do you think say there is 10% increase in revenues? Do you think health sector, education sector, any other social sector would get 10% increase or less? This is a question I am putting. The same thing, the reverse. If you read, if there is a kind of a sudden drop in revenues, is it going to be proportionately cut across ministries? That's typically doesn't happen. So based on our analysis, what we see is when budget goes up, the proportion that goes to individual sectors or ministries varies. And always in many countries, you'll see social sectors are hit hard. They don't get the kind of raise needed. When it comes to the cut, the cut is much more significant. So that's typically a kind of a situation which I am putting across for you to think through. I went through the country studies, and I look forward to the conversations. And to me, this is an amazing work which complements the global agenda of governments and development partners and United Nations taking forward the SDG agenda forward, and IBP plays a very, very critical role. I look forward from the PIFA, we all look forward to collaborating with each of you in this agenda in your own countries. We'll be very glad to work together. Thank you. And over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Srini, for your remarks and for taking the time to frame the importance of this discussion. So now to hear a bit of the specifics of this research that you're speaking on, I pass the floor to my colleague, Godson Nalorito, who is a program officer based in Ghana, who will speak to the overall approach and findings from this research. So thanks so much, Godson. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm excited to share the key learnings from our latest research on budget credibility with you all, and looking forward to the discussions afterwards. So what did we set out to do as IBP? Research conducted in 2022 by the International Budget Partnership and our civil society partners in 13 countries found that budget credibility challenges or low levels of budget execution are often concentrated in specific sectors and government entities. Expenditure shifts in those sectors can erode public trust and deprive those most in need of essential public services. So to dig deeper into those findings, IBP continued our collaboration with our civil society partners in 13 countries to further research why spending within specific SDG-related sectors deviated from the approved budget during budget implementation. Researchers essentially focused on one sector per country, on education, health, water and sanitation, agriculture, or environmental protection, to better understand the trends, drivers, and impacts of budget deviation on sector performance and efforts towards achieving the related sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. So what did we find? Despite the different country contexts, our research found significant deviations from the approved budget across sectors during budget implementation. For instance, 7 out of 13 countries recorded average deviations above 20%. Underspending against the approved budget was larger for capital spending. For example, less than 60% of the agricultural sector capital budget was executed in Ghana and then the Gambia over the last 5 years. Most governments do not clearly explain the deviations against their enacted budgets in their sector annual performance reports, or offer justifications about why these deviations are happening and whether they are impacting the delivery of services that people need. Perhaps because of this lack of accountability, many government officials also do not clearly know why budget deviations persist, and some sectors are shortchanged of resources or how to fix them. Next slide. Next one, please. Governments can do more to investigate why spending in social sectors deviates from the budget and identify options for reform. While the credibility problem varies by country, through our research with our civil society partners, we found that governments likely can improve budget implementation in line with the approved budget. by ensuring timely release of budgeted funds, strengthening the government's revenue forecasting function, because reliable revenue forecasts could fund their planned spending, streamlining bureaucratic processes that result in procurement delays, and lastly, improving the transparency of budget execution by reporting on detailed program level budgets and spending, giving specific reasons for deviations and sharing the impact of spending deviations on program and then performance goals. Civil society has a critical role to play in holding governments accountable for implementing their budgets as planned, including by analyzing budget reports and data to assess the budget credibility of their governments in different sectors. Specifically, CSOs should seek out reliable data, even if it is not publicly available. Interviews with government officials can be instrumental. Of course, access to government officials is a major challenge. Responses from government are often delayed and never guaranteed. The ability to have meaningful engagement is often built on existing relationships. Even when data is publicly available, line ministries responsible for executing sector or program budgets often outsource to the Ministry of Finance the responsibility for explaining deviations. Our researchers relied on other data sources, such as the reports by their respective countries' supreme audit institutions, audit reports, to assess the validity of some of the explanations that were provided by government sources about why deviations have occurred and how they impacted service delivery. Also, civil society would have to look beyond spending data to better understand the root causes of poor budget credibility. In each of the sectors analyzed, our researchers attempted to identify possible effects of spending deviations, be it underspending or overspending, on the execution of planned activities and the attainment of expected outcomes. Although budget under execution and poor performance against non-financial targets often go hand in hand, we found that poor budgeting, unrealistic performance targets, or delayed government disbursements may also play a part. Lastly, there is the need to develop a common criteria for assessing the explanations that account for poor budget credibility. Because what constitutes adequate justification is subjective and varies across countries. So CSOs, development partners, and government should collaborate and work towards generally accepted global principles that CSO architects can use in demanding greater credibility and transparency in terms of budget execution. So these are a high level summary of the research we did, and my colleagues coming after me would share some specifics from their countries. Thank you all for the attention.
Thank you so much, Godson. And building off this research, as I mentioned, we're also launching a how-to guide, which is a simplified framework of this methodology that Godson just presented, which we hope can serve as a starting point for others interested in conducting similar kind of research in their own contexts. So next, now to hear about some of these contexts, I would like to start by turning it over to Lisa Higginson, Budget Advocacy Coordinator at the Public Service Accountability Monitor at Rhodes University in South Africa, who will speak to their research on water and sanitation. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Claire. And yeah, before I start, just wanted to say thanks very much to the IBP team for inviting us to participate today. We really enjoyed being part of this process. We found the approach really interesting, and we're hoping to take it forward in our work. So we'll start off from there. If we can go to the first slide. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So the methodology, the first brief we did, we looked at budget credibility across, wait, one slide back, across a few different sectors. And there we were provided with a simple framework, an Excel spreadsheet that we used to calculate the deviations in these different sectors and compare those against SDG progress. And this we thought was a really sort of neat approach. In South Africa, we have quite good budget data. And so we could quite quickly populate this table and get a very quick visual sort of sense of where some of the challenges are and where we need to improve. So we found there were quite relatively low deviations in percentage terms, but also quite slow progress. So for the second brief, we were required to do a deeper interrogation. We didn't have the neat framework. And we needed to look at various different documents to start understanding the trends. And we chose water and sanitation. It was one of the sectors where there was some deviation from the first brief. And it was an area of concern for us where we're based in Makana, in the Eastern Cape. It's a water scarce area that's been struggling with water issues for more than 10 years. We have a situation where we have water on for 2 days, off for 2 days. And there are many people in the community who go for weeks without water. The quality of water is also a serious concern, and we've had issues across the country with a recent cholera outbreak that caused the death of more than 40 people. So this is something that we're really concerned about, and we thought we would really like to dig in a little bit deeper and understand some of the sort of budget credibility issues in the sector. We quickly found out that there was quite a lot of complexity to deal with. The budget is sort of allocated to the national department and then dispersed through various different stakeholders, regional stakeholders, water boards, and eventually municipalities. And so that was the first kind of thing we had to grapple with. And from there, we started putting together our analysis. Overall, we found, that looking at budget credibility rather than the allocations only helped us to really identify some of these systemic challenges in the sector. And we hope that these can be, by identifying these and trying to address them, we can improve the quality of water supply. Next slide, please. So the key findings, one of the things that stood out immediately is that when we looked at the sector as a whole, the deviations were not all that huge. But once we started to look at a little bit more detail, we found that there were quite significant deviations, mostly underspending. And this was taking place, particularly compensation of employees. We see there's 7% underspent, which translates into quite a large sum of money, and also payment for capital assets, so infrastructure and buildings, underspent by about 35%. We found that underspending was largely attributed to vacancies in the departments, many of these in key oversight and technical positions, as well as in administration. So while we found that each year there was underspending in compensation of employees because of vacancies, there was also about 200 million rand underspent in HR. And this obviously has quite a serious impact on the ability of the department to recruit the right kind of staff. And so what we see is this issue sort of continues year after year. We looked a little bit at the transfers and subsidies, recognizing that these are funds that are transferred to municipalities for the delivery of water, for repairs, for maintenance, for investment in new infrastructure. And we found that it was only about 2% overall, but this kind of amounted to 1 to 2 billion rand each year underspent on key infrastructure grants. And one of the major issues there identified was around procurement and supply chain management. So projects were delayed, contractors would disappear. There were various reasons why projects weren't completed, and that was the reason for the underspend. So we looked at the municipality where we are based, Makana, and we found that in some cases the grants were underspent by as much as 80%. So this is money that's dispersed by the National Treasury and sent back at the end of the year, while the community in Makana continues to suffer with ongoing water outages. So what we found is that it was poor planning and execution across the spheres of government, and particularly inadequate oversight and challenges. And another finding that's not in the slide, but probably worth mentioning, is that we didn't find that there was a lot of research or citizen monitoring of these particular issues. So the next slide, please. Our recommendations, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's been said about the quality of data that's available in South Africa, and we were really fortunate that we were able to look at annual reports, and we did find explanations of some of these issues. But again, each year it was the same issue that was used as an explanation without any real sense of what was being done to change these problems, what was being done to improve recruitment, what was being done to address the problems in supply chain management. So one of our first recommendations is to improve the reporting to better enable citizen monitoring. We struggle to sometimes unpack the budget to really understand how these transfers are taking place, and we think more could be done to really enable all citizens to be able to understand what's going on. We also recommended improving coordination across departments to improve the execution of budgets. There's a lot of sort of shifting of blame that takes place. And again, there's these persistent challenges that aren't addressed. We also recommend the establishment of better financial controls and oversight mechanisms to monitor in-year spending so that problems can be identified and resolved before they come to the end of the year and the money is sent back. Further research required to unpack some of the budget credibility issues across the different structures, particularly local governments that are really having water supply and quality challenges, and to engage with the Department of Water and Sanitation and Parliament to examine and address the persistent challenges. We did manage to have a brief discussion with a representative from the Department of Water and Sanitation, and we hope to take our brief back to them and get their input. That's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, as Srini noted in the chat, as you mentioned, improve reporting to enable better citizen monitoring, as you indicated, can be transformative, possibly needed to be prioritized for accelerated action. Great also to have your continued engagement with our speakers in the chat and what's important. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your continued collaboration and also for this intervention. So next up, we will be hearing from Nathan Spolansky, a member of SDGs Tax Justice Program, whose research focused on deviations in Argentina's education sector. Again, a reminder, if you haven't already, to choose the interpretation language you would like to be hearing this presentation, as Nathan will be giving his remarks in Spanish. Thanks so much, and over to you, Nathan.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so very much. I will present the work on budget credibility in education on the case of kindergartens in Argentina. Why did we choose to focus on education? This voluntary review on the SDGs in Argentina shows that the national government considers education as a central pillar in the social fabric and shows this as a tool that can give rise to opportunities and equality. Argentina also focuses and incorporates the Rights of Children Convention in our constitution, focusing on the rights of boys, girls, and adolescents. Through this, the government commits to ensuring a allocation of resources so as to guarantee the rights of boys, girls, and adolescents. These funds can never go below to the budget execution in previous years. We also have a national education law by virtue of which the consolidated budget allocated to education cannot be lower than 6% of our GDP. This law regulates the obligation of having universal services for children starting at 4 years of age. However, the annual expenditure in education does not reach 6%. Educational coverage is not universal, and we see large disparities from one province to the next. The document focuses on credibility challenges, considering the program to increase and improve buildings for kindergartens so as to tackle inequality in this initial education service. We focus on schools that provide services for children between 3 and 5 years of age. We had a mixed methodological approach with public information requests and by reviewing budgetary documents. With regards to the documentation, we saw the financial execution of the budget, and we also compared the initial and the current budget. We also considered the fiscal objectives of the program. We also requested meetings with infrastructure officers at the Ministry of Education. They declined to be part of these meetings. Next slide, please. Amongst the main findings, we saw that programs aimed at boys, girls, and adolescents in education have significant deviations when it comes to resource allocation. We see that early childhood is a pillar for the Ministry of Education, but the program we analyzed pertaining to kindergartens executed 71% of funds available between 2018 and 2022, the years we chose for our analysis. At the same time, the current budget for the program had cuts of up to 52% and increases of 38% of resources compared to the original budget for the period. Next slide, please. If we look at the physical goals, the building strengthening for kindergartens has not complied with its objectives. Fewer classrooms were built, fewer square meters were built vis-a-vis what had been projected. We saw that 7,537 new classrooms had been put forward, but only 19% of these were built. At the same time, of the almost 900,000 planned square meters, only 38% of these were built. These numbers do not match the financial execution of the program. As we said before, 72% of the budget was executed. Amongst the main results, we see a high risk of persistent budget credibility problems in Argentina. It is worth pointing out the current financial situation in the country, the high levels of inflation and the high levels of external debt, which conditions expenditure. We see no measures to improve the management of funds. And it is families who have to cover educational costs and care costs for these boys, girls, and adolescents privately because the state is not providing universal access to education. This is why at ASEG we recommended that during the budgetary process, the executive branch needs to comply with what was set forth by Congress, justifying and explaining, accounting for any deviation. We also recommended giving priority to accountability and improving resource management. Otherwise, it will be very hard to change these problems that we see time and again, year after year. We also recommended analyzing public policies to see whether outcomes match the proposed objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Great to have your intervention. And finally, we'll be passing it on to Asiato Diop, Budget Credibility Program Officer based in Senegal, who will be speaking to her research and engagement around budget credibility and water and sanitation in Senegal. Over to you.
Budget credibility in Senegal, as many countries, is also, we can see budget credibility in Senegal for many sectors. And one sector that actually where we see it the most is the sanitation sector. And that is the reason why we have actually focused on that for the research in Senegal. And one of the other main reasons is that we can literally see these these service delivery gaps in Senegal, especially the ones related to the gaps for sanitation services that actually translates in floods and are actually impacting millions of people in Senegal every year. So it has actually become worse year after year, to the point where the population, specifically the vulnerable groups who are heavily touched by it, are every year saying that they stop actually sleeping at night once the rain season is coming, because it translates for them to flood houses, to flood streets, overflooded streets, loss of materials, stress, and debtness, and so on. Next slide, please. And this is not the only repercussion of the lack of sanitation infrastructure in Senegal. The other one is related to public toilets. So we are having lack of public toilets in health facilities, markets, schools, etc. And the reason why is that the government is setting actually the sanitation sector as a priority every year in its political and budget actually priorities. But yet we are not seeing this because the lack we see in the toilets, the lack we see in the floods and the sanitation infrastructure is actually intensifying year after year and still translating for people in the lack of sewage, the fact that the toilets are not actually adequate for menstrual management or for disabled people. So the vulnerable groups are the ones that are most suffering from gaps. Next slide, please. So that's why we were interested in looking more into the subject from the PFM perspective, and how the approach that we have regarding this research is that we had built a relationship with key actors that are responsible for sanitation services in Senegal. And the reason why is that having access to this aggregated data, even to do this work, was very difficult because of the political economic context, because of the fact that bureaucracy is very close off and works in silo alone. So that's why we came with this approach, and we built that from the previous relationship. IBP already has started having with the government stakeholders in the sanitation sector. So collaborating with the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, specific actually directorate into the finance ministry and the procurement agencies, we were able actually to have access to this data and found very striking actually results. Next slide, please. So like you can see in this slide, focusing in what the specific program, that is the PASHA program. So a program that actually oversees the main sanitation program into the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. We have seen that there were actually understanding gaps happening in the sanitation sector for many programs. So we can see here that from an aggregate level for the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, we are having from 2018 and 2021 gaps up to 82%. And we are having these budget cuts actually happening every year throughout implementation, meaning that budget credibility actually is not, sorry, someone is not hearing clearly. Is it better, Claire? Okay. So this means that while we are having these big gaps into services, the budget is not being implemented as it should be. So meaning that we are having these programs that were actually supposed to bring people into safer area, to be rebuilding houses, to be having the sewage networks and the toilet, having up until 88% of underspending. So how so? What is explaining actually this trend actually inadequation between the budget and the services? And we found out, next slide please. We found out that these were actually related mostly to the fact that procurement was delaying the execution of the budget. We found out that budget cuts were actually happening throughout the budget year. So meaning that the approved budget were not actually reaching out to the Ministry of Sanitation for it to be paid as it should be. And finding that since we had this actually partnership with the government, where we were able to build a common understanding of budget and draw together common causes actually of this budget and have an action plan to address it, we were able to have many engagements with the sanitation and finance ministries in improving first the transparency of budget reporting, then actually having these dialogues to be able to overcome the coordination challenges and the procurement challenges. But two things that stood out the most from our approach is one regarding the fact that we leverage the PFM context in the fact that we had a chance in Senegal for the PFM structure. We were implementing the program budget in 2020. And there were these technical issues actually that the sanitation industry were having into receiving this new technology and the technical competencies required actually in this change. And we were able to leverage that to be working with them as partners to help find a way to bring this technical help needed actually to overcome the challenges regarding the program budget. And the other approach that stood out is the fact that we were able to leverage the communities who were actually able to collect granular data to compare and hold into account the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and put a pressure for them to act and fast on these budget credibility challenges. And so now the output from all that is that we are currently working into an action plan with the direction of sanitation to be actually trying to address all these budget credibility causes that we have identified in the SDG brief. So thank you so much, everyone. I will stay open for any question you may have.
Thank you so much, Asiatu. I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Sally Torbert, for some closing remarks. Sally Torbert is a Senior Program Officer at the International Budget Partnership. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you so much, Claire, and for both organizing this event today and for your excellent moderation. And I'm really delighted to be able to give a few closing words at the end of our very fruitful discussion today. So first of all, I really am grateful to all of you for taking the time to join us today. Budget credibility is a relatively new concept. It's been emerging more and more, and we're hearing about it more and more in the last couple of years. And you joining us today, I think we see as a sign that there is more interest in this topic and continuing discussions about how do we look more at budget implementation and how do we make sure that the funding that governments put in their budgets is really used to, as it is planned and as it should be to deliver the services that people need. I'd also like to give a huge thanks to the partners that worked with us in this research. And just to flag that this collaboration has been going on for more than 2 years. It is and has been an excellent opportunity for us to work with a number of our civil society partners to learn about how do we look into these issues of budget credibility. So this has been both a moment where we have learned a lot from all of the research you have all done, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to be able to work with you in developing these new tools and these new approaches for how do we look at budget credibility in our various countries. And so as a final reminder, I think we're very excited that today is actually the day of launching the results of these 2 years of working together with this group to be looking at these issues. And now we have a series of resources that we hope are useful to other people who would also like to try out this approach in your country or on a specific sector that you think is important to look at in terms of these issues. And so what resources do we have? Claire O'Donnell mentioned a few of them earlier, but we have both examples of the country case studies, and those are all available, published online on our website. And so you can see examples of the research that's been done so far. We also have the resources that you might need if you'd like to do this research in your country. And to do that, we have what we're calling a how-to guide. And this is a simplified version of the methodology where we've explained what are the steps that you could take to start looking at how the actual spending in your country compares to how the budgets were allocated at the beginning of the year. And then, as Godson said, how do you go beyond those numbers to look into what is actually happening that causes the government to deviate, often on a chronic basis, and have them not be addressing or fixing that problem over time. You also heard from Lisa that there's a pretty simple framework for looking at that. So the how-to guide also has a downloadable template of an Excel spreadsheet you can use to put in the numbers in your country and run that analysis, as well as the more detailed research frameworks if you really like to look into the different steps and the different sources of data you could use for this analysis. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today. I'd like to give a few final thank yous. So first of all, a huge thanks to Claire O'Donnell and Godson Alaritu, who are also the key authors of the synthesis guide that accompanies this report. And they have put a huge amount of effort into coordinating this resource with IBT. To Srini, Natan, Lisa, and Asiatu are fantastic speakers today. And thank you as well to all of you. We're here if you want to get in touch with us. If you're interested in doing this work in the future, then we hope you reach out. And this is hopefully the start of a future collaboration. So thanks so much.
Thank you all.